Hello, everyone. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky here. I am so excited to be here today, celebrating Older Americans Month with my fellow task force members and such an esteemed panel of guest speakers. The Task Force on Aging and Families prides itself on amplifying the needs of older Americans and their families, writing and advocating for bold policy changes to improve aging in America. And we are so delighted to hear from all of you. Our roundtable is calling itself a caring economy for an aging America. And did you know that every single day, 10,000 people in America turn 65 years in age? And yet, in the history of our country, we have never truly had a long-term care policy. Long-term care, especially home care, has been out of reach for too many people, seniors, people with disabilities, and communities of color. And our ability to take care of our aging population and people living with disabilities has been heavily hampered by cost, the lack of caregivers, and the lack of support for those who do the paid caregiving. But this problem also affects those who provide unpaid caregiving. The family member who takes care of an uncle with Alzheimer's, or gives up a career to take care of an adult child with brain injury. Or it affects a daughter who moves to a part-time work to care for her widowed mom who just can't take care of herself anymore. This struggle starts ending right now. We are so excited that President Biden's made a historic proposal to invest $400 billion in home and community-based service. The task force has led the charge on legislation that would help seniors and families, and we intend to do it again. And let me now have the pleasure of, before I do that, I want to say what I think is really the best theme of the day, and that is, let me just say that care infrastructure is infrastructure. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Conor Lamb, my colleague, who is also the, no, they told me to introduce. Oh, okay. Is Ayanna there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so now it is my pleasure to introduce my wonderful colleague and friend and task force vice chair, Ayanna Pressley. Take it away.
Thank you, Congresswoman Schakowsky. You know, you have been a personal shero of mine for a very long time, and so it is a great honor to be your partner in this work. It is time that we value our home health workers and the essential care providers who every day do the often invisible and thankless work of caring for our most vulnerable. Care has always been the backbone of our nation's economy. Yet for too long, we have consistently failed to make the critical investments needed to protect and broaden this fundamental economic sector. Moreover, it's long past time we value, affirm, and empower our care workers for their essential work. It's no secret that prior to the pandemic, our home care workforce was facing extreme challenges. For far too long, these essential workers have been paid stagnant, unlivable wages, and have not been provided the benefits and the support that they are due. And we know who is doing this work: disproportionately Black and brown women, women who often encounter language, education, and discriminatory barriers to employment. Too many home care workers across this nation work impossible hours to make ends meet. So many provide overnight care, commute home, sleep for a mere handful of hours, and then provide in-home care throughout the day. And somewhere in between must care for their own children and families. This is physically and emotionally demanding labor that we all know makes such an incredible difference for older adults and people with disabilities who can live in their homes and communities. Yet this workforce, particularly those who do not have the option to join a union, has been largely left to experience burnout and financial instability alone. I remain encouraged by the president's proposed investment of $400 billion in home and community-based care services. And while I feel encouraged, we in Congress need to meet the president's call and legislate a more equitable and just future and invest in our care economy like the critical infrastructure that it is. With that, I yield to my colleague and Taskforce co-chair, Congressman Conor Lamb.
Thank you, Ayanna. And I want to thank everybody who's tuned into this for spending some time with us and for all of your tireless advocacy, particularly our three guests today who are such leaders in this field and people that I always pay attention to when they're in the media or talking to us privately. There's a lot to learn. In basically the middle of my district is a nursing home called Brighton Wellness and Rehab. And if you looked it up, you'd see that in the early days of the pandemic, it was the deadliest place in the state of Pennsylvania. There were just in March, April, and May, these numbers are somewhat in dispute, but probably between 70 and 80 COVID deaths, well over 300 cases. And it quickly spun out of control compared to almost any other peer institution. And they've been on my mind a lot because this workforce, which was tireless and heroic and never gave up on their mission, is represented by the SEIU. They have tireless advocates working for them, and yet still most of them in the key positions of nurses aide and maintenance and cafeteria and janitorial, most of them all earn not only less than $15, but many of them earn less than $13 an hour still. They had a rally a couple months ago that I went to on the issue of safe staffing levels. So they were having a very public rally not to ask for more money or time off or contributions to their pension or healthcare. But they were asking for something that would make their own patients safer, and they were doing something for the welfare of their patients. When I went to that and learned a little bit more about the safe staffing issue and the way it affects all these patients and the way that it could have helped in the thick of the pandemic, they shared a story with me that I will remember forever as long as we work on these issues. And that was the woman who was really leading the rally told me that in those months when Brighton was in the news a lot and there was a lot of stigma about what was happening with the virus within those walls, she had multiple places that she normally went in the community. One was a gym, one was a diner where she liked to go and have breakfast, that asked her not to come back anymore because they were afraid that she was going to bring COVID to their place. People have known her for decades in the town that she has always lived in, stigmatized her at the very moment that every single day you could turn on the television and hear politicians and celebrities of all types talking about our heroic essential workers and people banging pots and pans in the streets and all the symbolic things that people did. Her reality was that she was being made to feel like Typhoid Mary. It's just not right. This is the reality that these people live in when we're asking them to do such hard and dangerous and difficult work. It's not right that they earn less than $15 an hour. It's not right that so many of them go unrepresented by unions while they do this kind of thing. And so we have a long way to go, but that means that there's plenty of places we could start. And I think we have a good core group here that represents a diverse cross-section of our caucus, because really at the end of the day, we all have parents and grandparents, and we all have older folks who raised us and taught the values of this country, and we want them to survive and do well into old age, and that requires a care economy. It's the fastest growing job in where I represent and in my state, so it would be ridiculous not to be trying to help the growth of this industry and sector and just recognize the humanity of these people. So that's really what we're trying to do here. We have had great champions within this caucus in Representative Schakowsky, who already spoke, as well as Representative Doris Matsui, who was nice enough to identify me when I came into Congress just 3 years ago as someone that cared about these things and represented an area where they were important. And I've been very thankful to Jan and Doris since then for making me a co-chair of this caucus. And with that, I'm very, very proud to introduce Representative Doris Matsui.
Thank you very much, Connor. And you provided such a moving story of what it really is like when we think about the people in our lives. And so for us, all of us here, the caring economy is really very much an infrastructure issue. And so at this very center of who we are as Americans, who we are as families, that is really so important to us. And I want to thank very much our guests for being here today. You are so important to our discussion today, and also my task force colleagues for participating in this really very important discussion today. Older Americans and their caregivers form the cornerstone of their communities. Seniors and their families deserve comprehensive services to allow them to live in their communities for as long as they choose. And to those who care for older Americans disproportionately, as we said, women of color, must be recognized and uplifted in their work as well. Each Congress, this task force puts together the Older Americans Bill of Rights, a covenant with seniors that urges Congress to uphold the dignity of older Americans and their families. A core tenet of the resolution is a right to age with dignity and independence. We facilitate this right by investing in mechanisms that allow aging in place, and that work starts with support for our caregivers. This pandemic made clear that it is time to rethink and revamp how we care for people as they age and need help with their daily tasks. We can do this by putting seniors at the center of the systems designed for care for them, devoting more dollars to in-home caregiving, and really ensuring that caregivers have a pathway to higher wages, stronger benefits, and safe working environment. This is our opportunity to build a better future. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists today and about how we can strengthen our care economy. Now, I am pleased to introduce Ai-jen Poo, who is the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and the co-director of Caring Across Generations. Under her leadership, the Alliance has led successful campaigns to pass domestic worker bills of rights in 10 states and 2 cities, extending rights and protections to domestic workers for the first time, including paid overtime, safe and healthy working conditions, and freedom from sexual harassment. Ai-jen also co-created the National Caring Across Generations campaign to ensure access to affordable care for the nation's aging population and access to quality jobs for the caregiving workforce. She is an award-winning organizer, thought leader, and social innovator, and a leading voice in the future of work and family care solutions. And we are fortunate to have her with us today. Ai-jen, I'll now turn it over to you now for your remarks.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Matsui, for the kind introduction, and thanks to all the co-chairs and members of the committee for having me today. We at Caring Across Generations and the National Domestic Workers Alliance have worked for over a decade to bring together older adults and people with disabilities, family caregivers, and the home care workforce to create a care infrastructure that would meet our collective needs as an aging nation. And I believe that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do precisely that right now. First, I want to thank you for your hard work in passing the American Rescue Plan and including additional funding for home and community-based services to help us weather the pandemic. Now, with the President's American Jobs Plan and the proposed $400 billion investment in Medicaid home and community-based services, we have a historic opportunity to expand access to essential services for people with disabilities and older people, and to raise wages and improve the quality of jobs for the direct care workforce once and for all. I do believe this is the highest impact jobs investment we could make, particularly if we want an equitable recovery for women, older women, and women of color in particular, for 3 reasons. First, there is the direct benefit of improving and creating good home care jobs for this overwhelmingly majority women of color workforce, including many older workers. These are jobs that won't be automated. They can't be outsourced. They are here to stay. but they have always been poverty wage jobs, impossible to make ends meet, and we currently have massive home care deserts, particularly in rural communities, because workers can't sustain on such poor wages. We can make these jobs good union jobs. Second, there's the benefit to the more than 42 million working family caregivers, the adult child or family member, also mostly women, who spend over 20 hours caring for a loved one on top of full-time work every week. This will enable them to get back to work, which is particularly important in light of the nearly 3 million women who've been pushed out of the workforce in the pandemic because of navigating caregiving challenges, also disproportionately women of color. And third, there's quality of life for older adults and people with disabilities who will have the services and supports they need to live independently in the community where they want to live, with downstream savings in our healthcare system, preventing institutionalization and unnecessary rehospitalizations or emergency room visits that happen because of a lack of access to good caregiving. And there's an important immigration dimension to all of this. Undocumented workers are overrepresented in the care sector. At least 1 in 10 care workers are undocumented. We believe it's also good policy to create a path to citizenship for undocumented essential workers in home care to help meet the demand and build the worker pipeline. In this country, we too often forget that aging is living. Longevity means longer to live, learn, teach, connect, love, if we have the systems in place to support quality of life as we age. The investment in HCBS and the American Jobs Plan takes us a long way towards building that system, and doing so in a way that lifts up the workers who are essential to that goal. I want to thank Congresswoman Dingell and all of the members of this committee for your leadership on this issue. Just like we transformed manufacturing jobs in the 20s and 30s from dangerous poverty wage jobs to jobs with real economic mobility, we can and must do the same for care jobs. This is our moment. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Ayanna. You have done such incredible work over the years, and it's so wonderful to have you advocating right now and the wonderful remarks that you made. Thank you. I want to introduce our next speaker, but first I just want to tell you the bells have been ringing here. Maybe you've been able to hear them, which means we have a vote. So people may be going in and out. I just wanted to tell you if it looks like we go out of order or someone isn't there, it's because they're voting right now on the floor of the House of Representatives. So our next guest is Rita Shula, who is the Director of Caregiving at AARP Public Policy Institute. Her focus is on internal and external family caregiving with an emphasis on identifying and supporting the needs of multicultural family care. Recently, Rita developed and produced a video called Home Alone Alliance, a video series that helps teach family members how to complete medical tasks in order to help the family care for their loved ones at home. Today, Rita will be speaking to us about family caregiving in Black and Brown communities and the need for equitable policy solutions that address challenges faced by diverse caregivers. She will be highlighting policy solutions to consider as Congress moves forward, and to move a care infrastructure package, and to ensure that we reach these communities and bring these vital infrastructure benefits to these communities. So Rita, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the House Democratic Caucus Task Force on Aging and Families. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. I especially want to thank Congresswoman Schakowsky for the kind introduction. As the Director of Caregiving at the AARP Public Policy Institute, I focus on the topic of family caregiving every day. This issue is also very personal to me. As the primary caregiver to my mother for almost 15 years and to my grandmother before that, I have firsthand knowledge of the caregiving experience. We were able to keep my mom in community. Eventually, her decline due to frontotemporal dementia led us to place her in a nursing home. It was not what any of us wanted. I couldn't keep my mom in community without adequate supports. Living in a predominantly Black county in Maryland that is often dubbed as the wealthiest Black county in the country, and my mom still did not have access to quality long-term services and supports in her community. Qualifying for a Medicaid HCBS waiver was great, but didn't mean so much when she was number 3,271 on the wait list. Her funds were dwindling, and my husband and I had nearly depleted our savings. With a toddler and an infant to raise, our options were limited. We were literally sandwiched. My story is not unique. I was but one of 48 million unpaid family caregivers, providing $470 billion in unpaid care annually. They are the backbone of the long-term care system. The tasks associated with caregiving are often depicted as simple, when care needs are many times quite complex. The complexity of care is intensified when caring for someone with dementia or a mental health concern. We can no longer ignore the experience of family caregivers from communities of color who don't fall into an average bucket. The caregiving journey of Black, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native American Alaskan Native peoples is often framed by cultural expectations to care for one's elder in their community. However, with existing structural inequities and lack of access to quality in-language services and supports, this expectation can come at a cost to the financial and health-related well-being of the family caregiver. What good is reaching for the proverbial oxygen mask to cover your face first if it has a hole in it? Black and Latinx family caregivers typically have lower household incomes compared to other caregivers, but they have high out-of-pocket costs spent on caregiving activities. In 2016, on average, Black caregivers spent $6,600 a year, while Latinx caregivers spent an average of $9,000. This results in much greater financial strain for Black and Hispanic caregivers compared to other caregivers. And we know that a majority of these individuals are also working full or part-time jobs. We know that the majority of family caregivers of color are women, and they must continue to be uplifted. What is less known is that men increasingly are providing care. 2.3 million Black male caregivers, many already burdened with societal judgments and stereotypes, care for others, often without any guidance and support to do even the most basic of tasks. So often when discussing strains family caregivers face, we neglect to look at the physical and emotional toll that the role can play. An important truth to understand is that layered on top of the day-to-day challenges of caregiving, many Black and Brown caregivers experience trauma from recent and historic events. I would be remiss if I didn't point to the importance of developing policies that intentionally address the needs of unpaid family caregivers, particularly those of older adults. Expansion of HCBS and support
for this important conversation and for inviting me to speak on behalf of the more than 5,500 mission-driven aging services provider members of Leading Age, who serve older people wherever they live, in their own homes and communities, in nursing homes, assisted living, low-income senior housing, life plan communities, and across the continuum of services from adult day, PACE, personal care, home health, hospice. The truth is, we've been skating on thin ice starting long before the pandemic. Except for people who can bankroll tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, or those who are poor enough or become poor enough to qualify for Medicaid, we are a developed country with a sophisticated healthcare system with no dependable, systematic plan to provide the long-term services and supports that more than half of us are going to need before we die. For those that do receive Medicaid-funded care, that program doesn't pay providers enough, really, to cover the cost of care. We value equity, but our long-term care financing system couldn't be further from that ideal. And the pandemic didn't create this problem. It merely took it from the shadows. We need to fix this disorganized system that most people don't even figure out is disorganized until they or a loved one needs care, or when there's a shock like the pandemic. It's time to pave the way to make this a good country to grow old in. President Biden did take a historic step by including long-term services and supports in the American Jobs Plan. And we acknowledge your courage and your foresight as you work to shape those bold proposals into legislation. The aging infrastructure indeed is an essential part of the nation's infrastructure. And the pandemic has presented an urgency to knit together today's patchwork of services and set a foundation for an aging infrastructure, a logical system. We encourage you to consider tying it all together by attending to 4 big challenges. The first is financing. We suggest a serious look at public-private partnership for long-term care coverage, similar to what's being discussed under the WISH Act right now. Second, moving around the system, getting into it. We should be able to assure people who need long-term care that there's a system in place, they know where to go to get their needs identified, to be assessed, and to help them access benefits and navigate the system as their needs change. Third, places or settings. Reform should be site neutral. Most people want to receive their services in home and community-based settings as long as they can, but there shouldn't be judgment about the settings that people go to. And speaking of settings, without a place to live, you can't use home and community-based services. So I hope you'll consider starting with finding a place to live for people in the community, for all low-income seniors who are eligible for housing assistance. And then when people do need residential long-term care, let's make sure that the places and services respond to 21st century needs, technology, and evidence. These shouldn't be mini hospitals. These are people's homes. Finally, it's human resources that drive the engine of long-term care. And we have all come to appreciate this during the pandemic. We must pay providers enough so that they can pay frontline workers in all settings a living wage. And we need new pipelines. There just aren't enough people in the United States to fill all the jobs in aging services. Immigration reform is part of this conversation. Leading Age offers steps that could bring us to the starting line in our blueprint for a better aging infrastructure that includes recommendations to address the economic, social, and racial inequities that older Americans face by expanding access to long-term care, strengthening residential services, and ensuring a strong comeback from COVID. Some highlights of our blueprint: strengthen investments in training and education and career pathways for for care workers, consistent with Representative Schakowsky's support for training programs for geriatric nurses and physicians. Build on Representative Dingell's proposal to permanently increase the Medicaid FMAP by 10% for long-term care. Make it setting blind, maybe, wherever a person uses their long-term care. Pay people on the front lines a living wage, locally determined, and reimburse providers so they can pay that wage. This step would reduce turnover and infuse billions of dollars into local economies. Maybe a GAO study could illuminate how this could be accomplished. Our nation's nursing homes were built in the middle of the last century for the most part. For the small number of people who do seek residential care, we really need to be ready with small, safe, modern places they can call home. This is about physical settings, and it's about care to support real quality of life. And speaking of home, in addition to increasing the supply of low-income senior housing to match the need, we need to invest in service coordinators to help residents and technology for aging services, including high-speed broadband access for people who need it, for everyone. If we don't grab this opportunity to address these challenges now, and I am confident that you will, if we don't repair the infrastructure for aging services, generations will be paying for years to come. Thank you again for inviting me to talk with you, and Leading Age looks forward to working with you to make our country a great place to grow old.
You're muted, Congresswoman.
I did it again, sorry. Thank you so much, Ruth, for that discussion and for your recommendations. There is clearly a lot of work to do, and as you said, we're going to do it. So I would now like to open the floor for attendees who are here to ask questions of any of the guest speakers today, or of the task force members. And so I would now yield to co-chair Matsui.
Thank you very much, Jan. You've been a wonderful partner through all of this. I have a question for Ms. Chula. Is she here? Oh, I see you. New technology is making it easier to monitor someone at home and keep us connected with how our loved ones are doing. Ms. Chula, can you touch a bit on the role you see technology-enabled interventions playing in the care economy, and how do these platforms empower and support family givers?
Thank you for that question. I think technology is extremely important, and what we have been through over the past year plus in light of the pandemic really speaks to the importance of technology. I think one thing to take under consideration, however, with technology is access. In order to have technology and make it a part of this infrastructure, we have to ensure that it is equitable. And we know that in our country, in rural locations, there is a desert, as well as the digital divide that is so apparent in many urban communities as well. So while there is a lot of opportunity, and it is very important to increase ways that family caregivers can be a part of these conversations with their loved ones, and technology supports it as a mechanism, I think it's extremely important to recognize the fundamental basics that it can create a digital divide as well.
Thank you. And I think we approach that problem also with the other parts of the infrastructure, that broadband is so necessary for rural and urban areas, and accessibility is really very, very important. And that's a problem we'll have to address. Can I ask another question here from Ms. Pooh? The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that home health aid is the job projected to have the largest percentage increase in employment from 2018 to 2028. Ms. Pooh, you've spoken before about how we lose many incredible caregivers to low-wage service industries. If we fail to make care jobs living wage jobs with benefits, How can we recruit essential workers to meet the demand of a growing older population in America?
Well, I hear from caregivers every day about how passionate they are about their work. So many care workers that you meet will tell you that it's a calling to them. It's so much more than a job or a profession. And yet, because it is so undervalued and underpaid, and we have a situation where the people we're counting on to care for us can't take care of themselves or their own families doing this work, we do end up losing many of our best caregivers to other professions. So I think we have to seize this moment of opportunity to raise wages, make these jobs good jobs with real economic security, career pathways, benefits, and a union, so that we can take pride in this work, all the caregivers out there who really do bring all of their heart and soul to their work every day. So that it can be a profession that we honor and respect and value for what it's worth in our society.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pooh, and thank you for all your work. And I yield back to Ms. Schakowsky, my co-chair, who will moderate the next group of people.
Muted.
Okay, now I'm here. Oh, I think that's the saying of our time. You're muted. Okay, at least for me. Now I am pleased to turn it over to Congresswoman Dingell, who has been such a leader on these issues and a co-chair of our task force. Debbie?
Oh, thank you, Jan. And I want to thank all my colleagues and the panelists for helping to elevate this critical issue. As outlined by everybody here, I'm sorry I'm talking to you from the cloakroom, so it's not the most glamorous place. But as we've outlined, addressing HBBS and long-term care in the upcoming jobs panel is so critical for a number of reasons. You know, when I tell everybody, the Oxford Dictionary definition of infrastructure is systems or processes that help a country or nation operate efficiently. We do something that takes care of the pandemic. Don't know how broken the system is, and we won't talk about how broken it is, but I want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, the direct care workforce represents, as has been said here, the fastest growing occupation in the United States. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a direct care workforce is projected to add over 1 million new jobs in the next decade. And we're going to need it when you see what's happening and the number of people that are going to be turning 65 in the next few years. But the median wage for all direct care workers is less than $13 an hour, and they don't have any benefits. And I've dealt with a lot of long-term care workers. I was a caregiver myself and had to hire people, and I believed in paying a decent wage and I gave benefits, but I've heard so many people struggle. So I want to ask you, Jen, you understand firsthand the challenges that this low pay and lack of benefits poses to workers, as well as the seniors and people with disabilities who require home and community-based care. How would addressing these issues through the $400 billion Biden proposal be a win-win for those that they serve and for the workers themselves?
I always say that this $400 billion proposal for Medicaid, home and community-based services in the American Jobs Plan is the ultimate win-win proposal, because you have the direct benefit to the workers themselves who've been struggling in working poverty, struggling to take care of their own families doing this work, struggling to bring the best of who they are to work every single day as essential workers. And it's overwhelmingly women and women of color, and always has been. And home care workers, in fact, were excluded from labor protections in the New Deal because of racism. the fact that we have the opportunity to put those workers and those jobs front and center and really making them good jobs, which we know will be here to stay, is a huge opportunity. And then there's the other benefits of how it supports working family caregivers to get back to work and a good quality of life for the people who rely on those services every day for their basic needs so that they can live independently and have full, whole lives, even as they age and become more frail. Talk about a win-win-win-win. And then also talk about an equity agenda, having a jobs and infrastructure plan that doesn't leave women out, doesn't leave people of color out, but in fact really invests in our full capacity and ability to be a part of our economic recovery in this country. It really is a win-win, Congresswoman. Thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you, Ayan. And Ruth, you mentioned in your opening remarks that this $400 billion would allow us to not only reform, but reimagine the care infrastructure in the United States post-COVID. How would this historic investment help address long-standing issues? And I don't think most people understand how long the wait lists are, how many people are on the wait list, and the institutional bias in long-term care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in many states, there are indeed waiting lists, long waiting lists that people end up, in fact, not ever getting to the top of those lists and getting services. The ability to not only expand the access to services for people across the country, and we know there are 50 Medicaid programs and 50 different ways to go about providing home and community-based services, but the ability to expand services and to use that funding to pay fair wages to the people that work in those systems is absolutely going to make a huge difference, and it's critical. It's going to change the whole tenor of the country in terms of access to long-term care.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you everybody for what you're doing. It's just why it's so important that we get this program done. And Jan, I think I yield back to you.
Okay. Let me ask well, actually not, because I see that Ted Deutch has just arrived, and one of our co-chairs, and I'm so happy to yield the floor to you, Ted. We're kind of wrapping up, but if you have questions or comments, the floor is yours.
Hold on. Thanks, Jan. I appreciate it. I will dispense with the 30-minute speech I was prepared to deliver. And I'm just coming back. I was on at the beginning and appreciate everyone's comments. The only observation I make is that what struck me most about President Biden's choice to include $400 billion for home and community-based services in the infrastructure plan was that it's a long overdue spotlight on this essential part of our economy, which is what our speakers have talked about. And Ms. Pooh, I'd like to just ask you a question, since I get to hear you before. Well before the pandemic, you highlighted the need to recognize work that is done in homes across the country. You talked about that again today. In your very powerful TED Talk in 2019, you said that work in the home is the work that makes all other work possible, and yet it is, quote, almost defined by its invisibility, close quote. Can you just, we're getting ready to wrap up, can you just share a bit more about the underlying causes for the invisibility and explain more why shining this spotlight on work in the home and investing in that essential workforce is so important to our communities and to our country?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman, and for your leadership. I will say that this work, whether done by family members or done as a profession, has always been associated with women. And as a profession with women of color, home-based care work has faced a long history of racial exclusion in our labor laws dating back to the New Deal, which created a kind of imprint for how this workforce would be treated in our law and policy as less than real work. And we have a cultural norm in this country that really sees care, or before the pandemic, let me say, most of us thought about care as a personal responsibility or burden. And if we somehow couldn't afford home care for an aging parent, or if we somehow didn't have paid leave or couldn't afford childcare, that we somehow personally failed, that we are not a good daughter, we didn't save, that it was some kind of a failure of our own. And I think what the pandemic really highlighted is that it is actually a collective responsibility, and we need public policy and programs to support our ability to care for the people that we love and to support our ability to live well as we age. Just like roads, bridges, and tunnels, it is fundamental to our health and to economic activity. And it's been invisible because the people who do it and have borne the cost of our failure to invest in a care infrastructure have been women and people of color, but no longer. We are now all in this together, and we're going to invest in this infrastructure, I believe, so that we can build back better.
Ayanna, thanks for the powerful answer. Jan, I know when to leave well enough alone, and that was a fantastic way to for me to wrap this up. So I appreciate it. Thanks also to Rita and Ruth, and obviously Jan, you and Doris and Conor and Ayanna and Debbie. It's an honor to work on these issues with all of you. Thanks for giving me a couple minutes.
Well, I think that's a great way for, unless there are any other questions, that we're all in this together and we're all working together, advocates. And I know, Jen, this has been your life's work, and I'm so grateful to Ruth and Rita. This has been a fantastic panel, but really all we've done is sort of outline the kinds of things that we need to work on together now. And so I just want to, again, give a big thank you to all of you, to my colleagues, to our speakers. And I want to encourage all of you, to other people who are listening, to write letters to your representatives and senators, to make phone calls, to use social media. You're good at that, to put out your views and what you want to see happen. And you have to tell them that the caring proposals that would benefit you and your family, make it personal, and that's even more effective. So there's so much more to be done. I have full faith that we will do it. And I just want to end with once again saying that care infrastructure is infrastructure. So let's move forward together. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for your leadership.
Thanks, all of you.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
thank you so much. It was really great to hear your commitment, you guys. Thank you so much.
Take care.